One day I was at making hospital visits, and I saw a man who was badly, had a lot of bandages on his head, and he was in a bed next to my patient. I said, so what happened to, your head? He said, well, it's a long story, but I was riding a roller coaster the other day and got to the very top of the loop, and I saw a sign, but I couldn't read what it said. It made me very curious, so I decided I would ride the roller coaster again and try to get a better look at it. So I got in line, got on the roller coaster again, and got all the way up the top of the loop, and lo and behold, I still couldn't read what it said. The words were just too small. So I was bound and determined, he told me. So he got on the roller coaster again. This time he had a plan. When he got to the very top of the loop, he stood up. And I said, okay, so did you read the sign? He said, oh yeah. Well, what did it say? Don't stand up in the car, yeah. I've always liked roller coasters, except for those, the wooden ones, because they shake so bad. I feel like I have a minor concussion when I'm through riding those wooden roller coasters. And we don't ride much anymore because Annie is not a fan of roller coasters. I took her on a kiddie roller coaster a few years ago, and she almost lost her cookies. So we don't do that, but I do love them. It goes back to my childhood. When I was growing up, my parents would take us every summer to Six Flags Over Texas, which is in Arlington, Texas. And they had, kind of new at that time, they had a double loop roller coaster. You do two loops, right? And, compared to a lot of roller coasters today, it's not all that frightening, but it was very exciting back then. And we would go a lot of times during the week, so there wasn't big crowds, so I would get off and go get right back in line and get right back on it. So I would do the double loop roller coaster over and over again. I couldn't get enough of it. Well, the memory of that experience in my summers growing up serves as a little bit of a segue into my sermon title, which is Staying in the Loop. And that's what reminded me of the roller coaster back home. That phrase, you know what the phrase staying in the loop means. It means that you have certain knowledge that, before other people have it perhaps, and you're in the middle of what's going on. You might even be part of the decision-making process. So you're in the loop, right? You kind of have a good idea what's going on. This is particularly important at someone's workplace. Everyone wants to be in the loop, not out of the loop at work, and no one wants to be the last to know something that's going on. And this happens to me on occasion, even as the pastor. Sometimes I'm the last to know, something that's going on, but most of the time I find out pretty quickly, but sometimes it happens. One of the ways that we stay in the loop at work and apparently spread germs to one another is we have weekly staff meetings, and we meet once a week, and we talk about worship, planning for worship. We talk about projects that we might be working on, and people, and in the church, and prayer concerns, and all that. It's a way for us to stay in the loop with what's going on. People like to stay in the loop in general. I think that's why the 24-hour cable news is so popular, because you feel like you're always knowing what's going on in the world. And the internet, of course, has allowed us to be in the loop at a greater way than any other generation in human history. If you want to know what's going on, it's not hard to find out. You just get on the internet, and you can even stay in the loop in terms of yourself. How many of you, and I don't mean to pry or to suggest you might be a little narcissistic, but how many of you like to Google your name to find out what pops up? Yeah, it happens, right? Did you know that the company Google recently developed an app for your smartphone that will notify you when your name comes up out there in cyberspace? Doesn't matter where. If somebody's talking about you or writing about you or whatever, your name, it'll pop up. It will alert you to that. And you know what the name of the app is? Stay in the Loop. Stay in the Loop. I thought that was interesting. Well, speaking of that, That's all just really kind of introduction to what I want to talk about. Today is the first Sunday in a 3-year loop or cycle on the Christian calendar. Today is the first Sunday in Advent, but not just the first Sunday in Advent, it's the first Sunday in Advent, year A. Now I'm going to explain a lot of this stuff to you. It may be old hat to many, if not most of you, but I think it's something we need to sort of remind ourselves about so we'll, again, stay in the loop. We know what's going on. You should have learned this in confirmation class if you had it, and so you guys pay close attention to this, okay? The 3-year lectionary cycle or loop consists of year A, year B, and year C. Very creative, right? And each Sunday in that 3-year cycle highlights 4 different readings from 4 or more different readings from the Bible. Generally speaking, there's an Old Testament reading and a Psalm reading, a New Testament epistle reading, and then, of course, a gospel reading. And the way that we put the gospel in there is that year A primarily focuses on Matthew, year B focuses on Mark, and then year C would be Luke. Now, where does the Gospel of John come in? Well, the Gospel of John is sort of scattered throughout all 3 years, but primarily we see it pop up during Christmas and Easter time. That's where John usually comes in. So it's all very clear, right? Clear as mud. Now, does this mean that we read the entire Bible in a 3-year cycle? Not even close. We only read, if we read all 4 readings every Sunday for 3 years, we would only cover 13% of the Bible. So you might say we have a canon within the canon being the corpus of the Scripture readings, that we as Protestants and Catholics, mainline Protestants, we have a canon within a canon. We really only cover 13% of the Bible. And for people who really want to read more of the Bible, there is a daily lectionary calendar that you can read, and it still doesn't cover the entire Bible. If you really want to read the whole Bible, they have those programs where you can read it in a year. If you really are that disciplined, I know some of you have done that. So what are we to make of this 3-year cycle? What's it all about? Why is it important? I think it's an ingenious way to stay in the loop in terms of our Christian faith. Now, we call each year in this 3-year cycle, we call it a church year. It's not like our regular year beginning on January 1st. It's a year that begins on the first Sunday in Advent, which is today. And the church year is broken down into 6 distinct seasons. So you've got Advent, Christmas, you've got ordinary time, Lent, Easter, and Pentecost. And each of those seasons are represented by different colors. So today we have violet, and some people use blue for Advent. Then we'll have white for the season of Christmas, which includes Epiphany. And then you've got a little ordinary time, so you've got green, and that comes in later also during the summer for a long period of time. You've got violet or also for Lent, white again for Easter, and then red comes in at Pentecost, and we use red very sparingly. We might use it on Reformation Sunday or ordinations or things like that, but generally it's for Pentecost. Now this is all important because these seasons reflect sort of the life of Jesus, the pattern of his life. So we get to watch that movie every year. Once a year, we're playing a part in that movie. So for most Protestants and Catholics, the gospel lesson is sort of the primary focus for each Sunday because it directly relates to the life of Christ. And the other readings are generally chosen to support the gospel lesson for that day. Now, sometimes it's hard to understand how does that support it. And sometimes it's rather obvious. But today is a good example of how this works, and I'm just going to quickly go through the 4 readings and see how they kind of support the story of Jesus. The Isaiah reading, which we heard from the Advent candle today, is about the importance of Jerusalem as a place of instruction, The ancient vision of Jerusalem is to be a place of instruction and a place of peace. This is where peace begins in Jerusalem. And of course, Jerusalem plays a very prominent role in the life of Jesus, right? Now, Psalm 122, we didn't read it, but it was reflected in our call to worship. And many times that's what I do with the psalm reading, is just, it's put in there in the call to worship in some way. But it also, Psalm 122, it also reflects the importance of Jerusalem in Israel's history. And that famous phrase that we often hear, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, well, that's found in Psalm 122. And peace, as you know, is a prominent theme during the season of Advent. So that's the Old Testament. When we come to the two New Testament readings, they both emphasize today the notion of staying awake or being aware of the importance of the moment. So Paul tells us in Romans 13:11, besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. And I think that's an appropriate thing to say at this moment during a boring sermon. Some of you are probably about to go to sleep. So wake from your sleep, Paul says. And this directly supports the reading from the Gospel of Matthew today, where Jesus says, therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Now, we don't have time to unpack all that and talk about the theology, what it's talking about the second coming and all that sort of thing. But I like to think that both of these readings from Romans and Matthew today are emphasizing the importance of the moment, of the now. And in terms of the church year, I think today, this might be the most important moment right now, today. It's a good time to get in line for that roller coaster of faith that we talk about. One writer said, worship that is centered on the church year allows Christians to step into the life of Christ. You might step into it midstream, but if you start today, you're stepping into it at the beginning, in the whole drama that unfolds and plays out in Jesus' life, in that 3-year circle. So this is another way of saying that the church years, year A, B, and C, keeps us in the loop. And the loop starts today, right now. So this might be a good time to consider, I think, stepping up our game in terms of our Christian commitment. A good time to make an extraordinary effort to step into the life of Jesus. How many of you, have you received your Advent devotionals yet in the mail and so forth? Yeah. Well, I just want to quote from one of them because it's relevant for what I'm talking about. The one that Karen Olson wrote. She put, there's a phrase she uses, which is, today is an invitation to be a part of something. An invitation to be a part of something. And I think that's exactly what today is, or should be. But they say that life is a lot like a roller coaster. It has its ups and downs. And the same is true in our faith journeys. We have our ups and downs, our highs and lows, our mountains and our valleys. And sometimes, it's a lot like a double loop roller coaster, because sometimes we find ourselves completely upside down, not knowing which way is up. So at times we just want to scream at the top of our lungs and get off the roller coaster before we lose our cookies, right? And other times we just want to throw our hands up in the air and say, heck with it, let's just ride it. Let's just ride it. Let's go for it. So if you feel like you've been watching the movie, The Roller Coaster of Faith, rather than actually riding it, today's a good day to go buy your ticket. Get in line, buckle up, get ready. I invite you this morning not just to stay in the loop, but if you're not already in it, then get in the loop if you haven't already done so. Put it this way, today's a good day to reassess your loopiness. No, not a great word, but it works. Let me conclude by quoting from an inspirational writer. Her name is Stacy Charter. Life can be like a roller coaster, and just when you think you've had enough and you're ready to get off the ride and take the calm, easy merry-go-round, you change your mind. Throw your hands in the air and ride the roller coaster all over again. That's exhilaration. That's living a bit on the edge. That's being alive. Amen.